Hello, my name's Nicholas Rapold. I'm a critic and journalist. I'll be doing the talk. Let's welcome back filmmaker Ria Tajiri, and also welcome Shakuru Tajiri, who composed and performed music in the film, and producer Sharon Evans. This is a film that I think accomplishes something really miraculous. I think we're so used to thinking about the ones we love as they age that there's a sense of loss. But through this film, I think we understand a sense of discovery, understanding, and also as the movie structures itself with wisdom. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could just sort of start with, when did you understand that you would be shaping what you were filming into a film? I think 1999 is when your mother, I guess, started communicating differently, and 2006-ish is when you became a care partner. Is that? I'm just trying to remember from that film. So 2003.
Probably. She actually started developing dementia earlier than that, like I think 97. Well, it wasn't diagnosed until 99. And actually, it started right before I had this, kind of professional breakthrough. I was going to go to the Venice Film Festival, and I told her one day, and the next day I called her again, and she didn't remember me, who I was. She thought I was an imposter. So it was a really kind of devastating moment, and it was kind of a shock. So that's how and then I guess the next few years between 97 and 99, I was sort of trying to assess what was going on, and, trying to talk to people about it. I think around 99, then finally we had the diagnosis, but I, would fly back and forth. I was living in New York, so I would fly back and forth. She was living in California. I would fly back and forth to see her. And I didn't really want to make a film about it, but a lot of people thought that I should. And it just seemed, I don't know, morbid or something at the time. And I think this was a film really about coming into a kind of acceptance. It was a a lot of people, maybe they develop dementia and maybe they're not around for very long. And, 16 years is a long time. It's unusually a long time. So I think along the way, it was a kind of a journey, a personal journey, and then also a journey of discovery that, maybe sometimes kind of going into something that's really painful, you can actually make some other parts of life unfold that you don't expect, and you can really learn. And I think we tend to be dismissive of ability, right, and productivity. So it's really hard to see that there's anything useful about somebody not remembering or not being productive or not being able to do certain things. And we're overlooking some other aspects of what might happen, or what, we're not really listening, we're not seeing things. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on.
And I think that's something that comes through in your camera work, which is just tremendously sensitive and attuned. I mean, did you find yourself feeling attuned in a new way just through by attending in that way with the camera? Did you discover things with the camera?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was shooting mostly things to send home to family. I was actually just not really making films at that point because it was so devastating, and I was taking care of her, and I was working at this. I took a job that I really didn't like, but it was earning enough money so I could kind of fly back and forth and do certain care things that I needed to do. So at that point, it was working in corporate media, which was really soul deadening. But the outlet that I had was taking still photography, and that the still photography, I found out she's really a very attuned model, it was kind of like uncanny. It was like I would pick up the camera and she would just sort of like relax into a pose, and it was like, okay, all the pictures of her were really beautiful, but really uncanny. Like she would look at me a certain way and she would just do these subtle things. It was just fascinating, you know. And then I was like, okay. And then, you know, I sort of, and I had like the cheapest cameras, you know, point and shoots. I had an iPhone 5. Towards the end, I got a better camera, but I was just shooting with these little, you know, rinky-dink cameras, and it was kind of interesting. So I think I did, because it's so intimate and it's so personal, that I did become a kind of more attuned to her and her movements and what she would do and kind of predicting where she might be. And that actually was funny because it became this thing for my students where, well, the challenge I said to them is, it's challenging to make a film about somebody who doesn't move around that much. You know, who's pretty static. I mean, you know, sometimes she's walking. She could be very active, but you know, it's challenging making films about you know, it's just going through all the tropes, right? You know, you say, okay, a character-driven film, and you know, you want to follow them, and you want to be observational, and then you know, sometimes she's very animated, sometimes she's just very still. So it's really, but being patient, developing patience. And then suddenly capturing those moments when suddenly something would just happen in front of the camera.
Yeah. Well, it's a movie that really kind of recenters us. You know, I mean, it's not that you're on the outside looking in, but you're trying to see through her eyes in a way. I wonder if you could talk about just the kind of the wisdoms idea and how the movie is kind of punctuated by these idea of wisdoms.
Yeah. So the wisdoms. Well, we had the title first. We had the title Wisdom Gone Wild. And then I think throughout you know, we're going through a laborious task for years of trying to fundraise. And sometimes you'd get feedback and they'd say, well, we don't understand, what does this title mean? Or why, you know, is that demonstrated in your footage? And it almost became, and the very end, the last kind of, we had many, many different cuts. And the last cut, I decided to be very obvious about it, and it was a kind of funny. It was first kind of a joke, and I thought maybe we would replace it, but it became kind of started to work. But basically, the wisdoms that went wild, right? So and I just kind of picked up on things that were sort of my mother's wisdoms. You know, she was very centered around beauty. She was a beautician, and I think, you know, aesthetics were really. I mean, she wasn't like schooled or trained. I mean, she didn't go to college. She was she went to beauty school, but it was obviously important to her in some way, and you know, beautifying, making sure your hair was perfect and that kind of a thing. She really did like art, and she loved going to the museum. She brought us to the museum when we were little kids, and subsequently, you know, like my brother and sister were all artists, you know, she had this weird connection with animals. She didn't like animals. She was like always like, ooh. But then she could imitate them really. She had somehow internalized them, and she kind of became them, and it would kind of, yeah. So that was really something very funny. Yeah, so some sort of idiosyncratic. And she was obsessed about food and diet and nutrition. You know, she grew up very poor. They were eating wild birds. So she was very obsessed with eating properly and making sure we ate properly. And she became a yogi, and she became very spiritual in the latter part of her life in a very uncanny way. So, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if we could also just bring in Shakuro and Sharna. When did each of you come on to the project? Shakuro, I mean, the way the music kind of, it's like a river through the film in a way. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Ria's cousin, first and foremost. So, I mean, like, I've known she's been working on this film for a very long time, and she actually asked me to do the music probably like 9 years ago.
He was like 5 years old at the time.
And I mean, back then I was already making some music, and it was sort of like dreamy ambient stuff, but I knew she was already, she had like a very rough cut. And then sort of just the years passed by, and in that sort of time, I did music supervision, and I became a better composer. And then actually, like last year, Ria emailed me and was like, "Hey, the film, is still on, and would you like to compose for it? And it sort of made way more sense than the first time she asked me, because, you know, by that point I, you know, gained a lot of expertise, and you know, we started talking about what the direction for the score should be, and I became very inspired to like weave in the characters into the score, and Saria supplied me with like a bunch of family recordings, and you know, like the percussion stuff are like these 20-minute recordings of Brian playing percussion, and I would, you know, chop them up and create new pieces for the film. And we had the bell that Rose rings that, you know, at one point in the film we used as like a central sort of instrument. And so, you know, keeping it very minimalistic and not, you know, which was also a very good sort of director vision of Ria, was telling me like, you know, let's not fall into the trap of making the music dictate the emotional, you know, content for the viewer, right? So we stayed away of like making it too heavy, because of course the images or the story itself is already pretty, already has a lot of gravity to it. So, you know, we wanted to make sure that we created like an ambiance and basically let Rose and Brian and the characters in the film sort of score themselves. And so that's what like the idea was, and yeah, keeping it minimal.
Yeah, no, I mean, it has. I mean, it's also sort of meditative. I mean, with the final thing we hear is one of the bells, I guess, the tones at the end, just as it slowly fades. It's a wonderful way to finish things.
Yeah.
And Sharon, were you with the film from at what point did you come on board?
From the beginning, which was 9 years ago. 9
years, okay.
Long
so a long project, yeah.
Yeah. I've worked with Ria before. She her previous piece is called Lordville. And actually, I've known her for several decades. We were both editing in the same house maybe 40 years ago.
Great. Yeah.
As clients. We were both clients. And then we were talking. We'd known each other vaguely before that, but we realized that there was some understanding for her poetic language.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wanted to mention, obviously, History and Memory, an earlier work of yours, which is in the Whitney Biennial from '91. So you have like a history. It's your mother wasn't entirely unfamiliar with, you know, you're turning these things into art in some way. So, but we were talking before. Can you compare and kind of contrast that experience with this?
Yes. So I made an earlier film called History and Memory, and it was actually my first sort of documentary piece. I was doing video art when I came out of college, and then this was sort of like a more ambitious piece to kind of try to, you know, expand. And it was, you know, it was an exploration of the Japanese American incarceration in the United States. So during World War II, you know, because of the, you know, racism, Japanese Americans were put into concentration camps in the U.S. And so, you know, I had for years been asking my mother, and she wasn't telling me things. And so I ended up, you know, kind of looking for other parts of this story, and I ended up going to the archives, the National Archives. So I kind of put together sort of an essay film. And in that film, I asked my mother, you know, can you, you know, can we talk about this history? And she would say, oh, no, I don't remember anything. And, you know, I keep pressing her. And then she said, well, the only thing I can remember is that I saw this woman and she lost her mind. And then she said, you could lose your mind if you thought about it too much. So, you know, I don't remember anything. And then, you know, so it was like this kind of opaque, you know, way of dealing with things. And so I'm trying to construct a story from outside of that, you know, through other people in the family, their recollections, and then archival stuff. And then, you know, and then ironically, you know, she does develop dementia, and suddenly she wants to tell these stories about camp, and it's like a lot of stories. Sometimes I'm not sure if they're true, but, you know, they're sort of interesting even as fictions, right? Because, you know, they're sort of based on these real aspects and real things and real events. And one of the things that came out, which was fascinating, was there's a part, I don't know if you can understand, but she keeps saying this thing over and over: the Buddhists became the Christians became the Buddhists. And, you know, it's kind of funny. She says, the Hakuchin, they don't know, they don't understand. And what she's kind of referring to is, so that we didn't understand necessarily everything what this was about. And Sharon was like, let's look at this up. And we found out that just around this time, there was a sort of aspect of this historical moment that was beginning to be researched and uncovered. And what it's about is that a lot of the Japanese American priests or priests that had come from Japan were practicing Buddhism and had a community. They were being surveilled by the FBI, and so they converted to Christianity to avoid being persecuted. And so the Buddhists became the Christians. And then later on, like, Buddhism becomes very popular in the West, and then suddenly the Christians become the Buddhists. So she, it was a sort of interesting thing. It was like, oh, I think that's what she's trying to say.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, it almost sounds like song lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of sense.
But it's a sinister aspect of the internment,
yes.
and the whole experience in the country at that time.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's something that can be so jarring, is that it's as if she suddenly has the freedom is also. I mean, it's nerve-wracking because you're suddenly moving through these very intense memories, and sometimes it can be a lot. And I like how you characterize it as time traveling at one point, and also just the idea that if she speaks to you as if you're Betty, her sister who passed away, that you kind of accept that you accept that you can play those two roles. I mean, how did it take a long time to come to that kind of understanding?
Yeah, I think so. I think the beginning. I've met a lot of people who were taking care of their family members because my mother was in 3 different assisted livings. I kept moving her. I didn't like one, and I decided to move her to a different one. And the last one she was in was probably the best. It was the cheapest. I thought in the beginning she had to have these big, like, fancy places, and that was also, it became very difficult for different reasons. But I think I think as I started to kind of get what was working between us, it would be like just trying to kind of let go of a lot of things and be more accepting. And one of the things was like, well, what if I was Betty, to her? What if she sees me as Betty? And then it also just kind of made me feel like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, I always heard that Betty was really good at art and painting and sewing. So maybe I am kind of, I just started to feel like I'm going to be Betty. I'm embodying Betty, And it was interesting, because she said that, it made me think more and more about, well, who is Betty? And what might she have been like? And then I found that picture, and so it was just an interesting way to kind of keep Betty alive, I guess, in a way. So.
Yeah. I want to ask about another interesting technique of the filmmaking, which is the beauty shop setting, which, when I watched it, I didn't think of it as some different place or separate place. It almost felt like I was just in her dream in some way. Could you talk about that element of the film?
Yeah. So, well, it started that I was trying to, as I do, try all these different ways to kind of how, the question is always, how do you represent something like dementia without falling into a verite, documentary of somebody like, kind of looking very, debilitated or something. How can you also translate some of the things in conversations or experiences I had? And I thought, well, maybe we can create an environment, and I can bring her into this environment, and the environment might trigger different memories for her, and she might, because she would do things maybe before we were filming, and I thought, wow, it's really interesting, but I can't recreate that. So I thought, well, maybe we'll make this sort of environment. And it was a very interesting way that this came about, because the day that I decided to try to hire somebody and shoot, we got the streamers footage very spontaneously. And that afternoon we were wandering around the museum with the DP, and he was just like shooting little things as we would walk around. And then we bumped into these 2 people who were this production design team that I worked with on the very first film I ever worked on, like as a crew member outside of school. It was David Wasco and Sandy Reynolds Wasco, and they had become very famous at this point. They were like working with Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson, and they'd done Reservoir Dogs and all of Wes Anderson's films up to the family, the one about the family.
Royal Tenenbaums.
Yeah. And you know, I think Inglourious Bastards, that was their last film with Tarantino, was really, you know, like very accomplished, and they're really sweet. And you know, we were chatting, and Rose was chatting with them, and then they said, "Oh, you know, are you making a film?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm making this film about my mom." And they were like, "Oh, well, you know, if you ever need any help, just seriously give us a call. Just, you know, let me know." And I was like, okay, sure, you know. I'm like, I wonder if they really mean that. And, you know, so then maybe that summer, I think you and we kind of reconnected, and I decided, okay, maybe we're really going to do this. So I called them, and I pitched the idea, and they really liked it. And they said, we're in between jobs, so it's been slow. Yeah, we'll do it. And they came in and did it in 2 days, and it was really kind of amazing. And I think what ended up happening is, you know, as we were like going through and also the other thing is that when we brought my mom in, she began to sing very spontaneously. That wasn't planned. I didn't direct her. She just did this. So that was her response, you know, this very beautiful, tender song, Smoke It's in Your Eyes. And I think the way when we look at the footage, it looks like she's in her own, like, sort of, what did we call it? It was like a sanctuary.
Yeah, but there's also an aspect I was going to add to this, which is you were starting to develop what the visual image representation of the film was going to be, and you're really working on images of wildness, and that's what you're looking at, but accepting.
Yeah, the wildness and the
growth.
The way, yeah.
No, that's great. And there's almost a visual echo of that with the streamers as well. Just the kind of that's wonderful. I mean, I'm also curious, you know, how long was the process of just the editorial process? I mean, how many hours were you working with?
Too long.
Which time?
Yeah, I don't know. We had to stop and start. You know, we would start, and then we would run out of money, and then we'd stop. You know, like I think Sean would always say, "Oh, the editors, they're the ones who are making the money in this film," because I mean, you know, you need the editors, right?
You need many, many thousands of dollars.
Yeah, you need a lot of money. But I think also what it came down to was I needed to kind of come in and kind of just form the language, because it was, you know, like people would kind of, obviously they work a lot on verite. They work, you know, documentary and character driven, so the impulse is to go that way. But I really I just didn't see it that way, and it wasn't going to work, I think, you know, like given the footage we had was so fragmentary. So I had to kind of I did a couple of residencies, and I went away, and, you know, and kind of came up with this language and these scenes and a different way of putting together. But the real push is that I finally we just said, okay, you know, maybe we can get this squeeze the last little bit of money out, and then we're going to have to finish it. And so that was like a year ago.
But you were editing for years before COVID. It's a long process.
It's a long process, but the big push came like right after that.
It formed with one specific editor, but it's a long process. It's all good. But
absolutely. I mean, it's you know, minutely, it's very good. I mean, also, I mean, you were mentioning that you don't necessarily want a narrative, because one temptation of the narrative will be decline. You know, and that's not what you're going for. Definitely. That was the outcome, because, you know, the traditional arc is that, like, you know. Right. So. Yeah. I mean, because in a way, I mean, the ending is sort of open. I mean, it's sort of the infinite possibility of her dream, sort of the dream logic that you described earlier. There's one other aspect of the film that's kind of interesting, because it's sort of a presence and an absence about their father, Vince Tajiri. Could you talk a bit about that and how that kind of comes in and out? And also she seems to be sort of reclaiming a name. It's very interesting. Yeah,
I feel like, so my father was this very, you know, kind of prominent figure. You know, he was the photography editor for Playboy, so he was kind of infamous, you know, in the Japanese American community. And, you know, he was a cool guy, and he was a, you know, wonderful artist and photographer, designer. And, you know, we draw on his archives, his home movie, or his home photos are so really cool and beautifully composed. And maybe she lived in his shadow a bit, you know. I think the 50s and 60s were really, I mean, very unkind to women. But so I think it's just interesting, because after she died, you know, of course, and she developed dementia a few years later, suddenly it was almost like he didn't exist anymore. And, you know, he was gone. And we sort of chuckled. We was like, okay, Mom, what's that about? And yeah, so, you know, but obviously we have to talk about it a little bit. I mean, he did kind of come back in little moments towards the end of her life, which is kind of, it was very poignant. Yeah, but it's interesting. It's like she, in her dementia, she needed to rebuild, kind of make a whole new life for herself.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think those are some of the, you know, most fascinating parts of the movie, those moments, the different kinds of agency that she kind of exerts, you know. And I like also how you know, I think, isn't there a moment where there's one moment where you cut to footage from the 90s where she's learning how to zoom and focus, and I feel like it comes right after an epiphany for her a little bit. So the way you use those moments, and I also like that you give her the camera so she's questioning you. I mean, she also has a way of like setting scenes and like almost staging, like with the doctor, she like directs her own scene almost there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so people would also say, you know, this could be exploitative, and I was like, but she's enjoying it. She loves to perform. I mean, if you had known my mother prior to dementia, she was a very, you know, sort of shy, kind of retiring person. Oh no, you know, and then this whole other persona emerges, and she loves being the center of attention, and she knows how to draw attention. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. I have to ask Shakuro, I mean, what is it like, you know, watching your family's extended family's story through this? I mean, what did you feel you learned through it? Or?
I mean, yeah, it was beautiful because I mean, I spent with my own grandmother, and a lot of family members are in the film, and it was, you know, it was. I mean, it was very strange, sort of. I didn't really know how it was going to resonate with other people, because I mean, this is like, I knew about this story, and of course, you know, I've known Ria, and this is something that's very dear to us, and something that I find very interesting, of course, but I had no idea how that would resonate to other people. But I mean, it's amazing, and also to see, and also to hear from other people, like, oh, this is. It sort of outgrows the family, and it becomes this sort of more universal message, and I think that's very powerful. So no, it's great to see.
Yeah, and I mean, and Ria, I'm curious, like what is wisdom number 6, or what do you get after having made the movie now, or what do you feel?
I don't know. Listening is listening. You know, it's funny to see my nephew said to me, we were cutting the trailer, and I said, oh, which one do you think works? And he wrote me back, well, you know, he goes, but wow, Grandma has star power. And I just find it really funny to go and see her in the hall in the poster and think about, oh, you know, she's going to be this emissary to carry this message out into the world, and hopefully, you know, we can share this film, like, you know, worldwide, and, you know, have it travel. That would be really amazing. So. Yeah,
well, I would agree with that. Definitely star power. Well, thank you so much for this beautiful film. Thank you.
Thank you so much.